Hello and welcome to another edition of District of Sports, our sports podcast here at the Washington Times. Reminder to check out all of our sports coverage at WashingtonTimes.com/sports. George Gerbo, Liam Griffin with you. Liam joining us appropriately enough from Nationals Park as we talk about the Washington Nationals and their start to the season. Liam, good to see you.
Yeah, that was an exciting time. The team is maybe not a championship contending quite yet as they get introduced in the background, but they're a fun team and the fans are having a good time at the ballpark these days. So that's what you can ask for a rebuilding team.
A lot of good, a lot of bad as well. We'll focus on the good to start. The bats are alive. The Atlanta's sprinting away a little bit with best record in baseball with the top of the division, but Washington hanging in there so far in a season for a lot of teams. It's kind of, hovering around this 500 mark. It's not just the Nationals. That's kind of widespread so far in this first quarter, first month plus of the Major League Baseball season. Liam, they're not just hitting the ball. They are tattooing the ball to the tune of a top five number in nearly 200 runs. It will be over 200 runs soon enough, which is top five in Major League Baseball. They've got the third most RBIs in the game. They are averaging 5.3 runs per game. And it's not just this fluky guys getting on base and generating runs. They are hammering the ball. They are James Wood, what he's been doing, CJ Abrams, what he's been doing. These are not just like when you see small ball type of approaches. These guys are getting barrels on balls, driving them to the deepest parts of the field, hitting them out of the park in a lot of instances, probably to the surprise of some people, but kind of as we talked about before the season, the analytics approach that this administration, Paul Taboni and Blake Butera have kind of approached it from that angle and diving more into the numbers. Those early returns have paid off in a big way.
Oh, absolutely. And James Wood and CJ Abrams are the easiest kind of examples to point to they are just smacking the ball. CJ Abrams on Wednesday night had a 5 RBI game, hit a grand slam in an absolute blowout of the Minnesota Twins. And James Wood is one of the hardest hitters in the league. If you look at the advanced analytics and the exit velocity that he's putting on baseballs, a lot of times they end up finding their way out of the park, and even when they're not, but he is just sending them out there on a line. And when you extrapolate that over the course of the season, a lot more and more of those baseballs are going to find their way into the stands. And that's the kind of approach that this regime is taking when they're looking at rebuilding this young core. It's the process that matters most. It's great to get the results. It's great to get the results early so you can start to get some of those buy-in from players, from fans, from the broader MLB ecosystem. But they are doing things the right way. They're doing things smart with a focus on analytics. And even when you go to some of the less flashy players, my favorite example of this as they try to kind of remake guys' swings and the way that they approach pitchers when they get in the box is center fielder Jacob Young, who over the past few seasons has been a Gold Glove caliber player who hasn't gotten quite that recognition because of playing for the Washington Nationals. But his advanced analytics and things like expected batting average, his squared up percentage, his launch angles are just soaring. And they haven't quite reached that same level in the counting stats, the batting average, the slugging percentage, because he's had some unlucky hits on balls in play. But that's something they can point at and say, that's going to turn around. We're comfortable with the numbers of when we change our approach, when we focus on swing speed and launch angle and getting guys who are squaring up the barrel of the ball to opposing pitchers. That's something that they're going to be very comfortable with as they start to build this roster, not only toward the end of this year, but looking forward into the future as well.
You mentioned CJ Abrams. He's at the top of tied at the top of the RBI charts in the league. James Wood's already into double-digit home runs. I'll throw a shout-out into my alma mater, West Virginia University, which has built we talked about, you and I, the trajectory system that the Nats have. James Wood went to Morgantown in the offseason and went to their pitching lab that they have there, which has 16 different cameras to track how the ball is coming. They're trying to prevent injuries or identify points of tension but not only for pitchers, but also for hitters. And that seemed the delving into those numbers and understanding the why and the science behind it seems to have helped not just Wood, but other people across the Nats roster. I'm curious if in the clubhouse or among players and management, is there a citing of, since we've taken this approach and using the numbers and trying to look at it analytically, that this is the primary reason that we've had this level of success, or do they feel it's just a little more widespread and a young team that has been super young, just kind of getting its sea legs over the last couple of weeks to start this season?
Yeah, and that's why I feel like it's important to, obviously, you're going to give guys like James Wood and CJ Abrams their flowers because they're playing like all-stars, if it's for running team potential MVP candidates. But we've seen them do this before. This is not new for those two guys in particular. But when you look further down the roster into some of even the younger players, which is crazy when you talk about Wood and Abrams, who are both still shy of 30, have plenty of baseball left. But when you look at somebody like Jalen Lyle, when you look at Brady Howell, those guys who are really new additions to being day-to-day big leaguers, and they will tell you they have every player in that clubhouse has a report. So they get a report card every day that says how they're doing. Everyone can look at the box score, but it's telling them, the minutia of how they're doing against certain counts, against certain pitchers, against certain pitch types. Like, all of those things are readily available to them in paper copies and on their phones, on iPads throughout the clubhouse. And the players have really latched onto these things because it's not entirely new to them as much as it is new to this organization. The Nationals are kind of behind the curve. And so these players, when they're, this new technology and these new strategies are implemented, they're willing to pick them up and hit the ground running. We've already seen that.
That's the good side of it, Liam. The bad side, pitching. Oh, okay. How bad can it be? It's very bad. And it's not just like, we're talking bottom 3 in the league, if not worst in the league in some of these numbers. They're third worst in ERA as a staff, 4.8. They've given up the second most earned runs in the league. They've allowed the most home runs in baseball as a staff, 54. And then add to that the third fewest strikeouts on the staff in the major leagues. And I don't want to lump all of it into the back end, the bullpen struggles, but just writ large, even across some of the starters, just like when you're giving up that many home runs, to me it feels like a location issue. They're not getting nickeled and dimed on RBI singles and RBI doubles in the same way that the Nationals are hitting the ball, are the way that teams are hitting the ball against the Nationals pitching staff.
Yeah, and it's something that I will say to their credit. The first couple weeks of the season, we're about a month into the season, a little more now. The first 2 to 3 weeks were atrocious, quite frankly. Like, it was by far not just the worst in the league, but on pace to be like one of the worst we've seen pitching staff-wise, like since the steroid era. And they have really started to fine-tune that over the last couple weeks. And some of that is, here's where they're at pitching-wise, is they have a lot of young talent in the lineup and in the position players. They do not have that same caliber of talent currently ready to take them out for them at the big league level. And so they're making do with what they can, which in a lot of cases is guys who are passed off from other teams and other leagues. Their best starter this year, by most of the numbers, has been Foster Griffin, who was in the Japanese leagues this time last year. And so they are making do with what they have in a way that I think is really interesting to watch on a game-to-game basis. Because managers like Butera, this isn't news to him. He knows the roster that he was coming into and where this organization's strengths and weaknesses were. And so he says, all right, how can I make this work? And so for the first time in really franchise history, they started to use an opener. PJ Poulin has come in to open games more often, where he's traditionally a reliever, potentially a closer. And they say, all right, we want you to get in there immediately and start us strong. Get the first 3 to 5 guys out, and they feel happy about that. And that has really opened up things for guys like Miles Nicholas and Zach Little, who are starters who struggle a bit to start the season, but now they're being used in both relief. They're not facing an order, 3 full times through. And so it's able to give them a little bit more leeway when it comes to pitchers who are maybe narrowing in on some of their, their off speed, or they don't have electric fastballs the way that some other guys around the league do. And so using each pitcher in a kind of new and fresh way to keep offenses from settling in and just teeing off has been really important over the past couple weeks. But using AAA Rochester so that you can keep fresh arms cycling in and out. I believe at the most recent count, they've had 23 different pitchers who have already taken the mound for them this season, including one position player, but we won't talk about that. But they are using just everybody they've got, and they say if you can play well, you'll stick around. If we need an arm, they had a run of 17 games in 17 days last month. We'll take everybody that we can get. There is no real rigidity to the way they're approaching this pitching staff. They're very flexible, and the players are really buying into that as well.
Going along with the pitching in an unfortunate way is the defense. The Nationals commit a ton of errors, and this kind of, I don't want to harp on, we talked a lot about the youth in this team, and they've been hitting the ball, and the hitting has kind of, buoyed a lot of things so far this season. But at some point, when you've committed the most errors in Major League Baseball, -4 defensive runs saved as a team, those, which is bottom third in baseball, those are going to be the difference. And I know they're playing, as you're at, a lot of these interleague games right now, right? But as you kind of transition out of the interleague and you get more into this divisional play where you're seeing the same teams a little more frequently and you start picking up on tendencies, correcting those miscues in the field are going to be the things that win you these. It's great to hit a grand slam and score 15 runs against the Twins, but can you do that night in and night out against the Phillies, who are right there with you, or, as we mentioned, Atlanta, who's leading the top of the league?
Yeah, and that's something they've really started to focus in on, which Blake Butera and a lot of the coaches on this staff have come through the minor league ranks. And so those kinds of fundamentals of fielding and knowing where to go with the ball and just making the easy plays when you have them is something that absolutely can drive them crazy. Last weekend during a series against the Brewers, who I believe may have been one of the first teams that they have a second series against. They're already done with that season series, and the Brewers are a well-run team. They play a lot of small ball. They can make things difficult for a young roster. And on the middle game of that series, Foster Griffin took a loss despite not allowing an earned run. And that is just a horrific setup for your team. And so they had a matinee game the next day, and Blake Butera cut off his availability early so that he could rush to the field and run. It was almost like spring training style drills. He had pitchers on the mound doing pitchers fielding practice. They had a stopwatch running to see if guys could, be a runner from third to home on a grounder. Like, all those things are being narrowed in on. And like we said, it is the process where CJ Abrams is maybe that's kind of the fielder that he's going to be throughout his career, and they're willing to take that. But somebody like Brady House, who is near the top of Major League Baseball in errors, playing third base, like, they need him to narrow that up, because it can be the difference, if not now, then potentially later when you are playing games that matter a little bit more when you get into August and September. Maybe this year, maybe in future years when you're looking at making a run in tight divisions and tight conferences, because Major League Baseball is a weird spot to start this year. I looked at the American League standings this morning. I believe there's still only 2 teams above 500 over there, and the National League is not far behind in that pace. And so you need to clean up those things, and it will drive a manager absolutely insane. And this is the thing that I respect about the way this organization is running is, we see an issue and the frustration is kind of unavoidable, but they immediately take to say, how can we improve this? What can we do? And so they say, okay, we're going to do more fielding practice. We're not going to take it as a given that just because you're a major leaguer, you're going to make all those plays. We're going to give guys the reps. We're going to make them think through things. We're going to make the practices harder than the games, is what Blake Butera says, to really test them and kind of give it a stress test so that when you are in those game situations, things start to become second nature. But this team, it's such a young roster. We're going to say it a lot for the next couple of years, because it can't be understated in the ways that they are still learning how to be professionals really on a day-to-day basis.
And they'll get the chance to fine-tune that with divisional rival series against the Marlins, Mets, Braves, all coming up here before the end of the month, as well as the Battle of the Beltways if you're a Nats fan, and looking for even more positives, you can look up the road there up 95 at what's happening in Baltimore with how they have restructured things and things not going as well as would have liked, as Orioles fans would have liked to hope with the transition there so far and some of the injury struggles that they've had in Baltimore. You're at Nats Park. Let's switch to another event going on sporting-wise this weekend in the DMV. Golf is back in the area. The DMV hasn't had a regular stop. You get kind of these one-off things that come through, and another one of them, Liam, is LIV Golf, which is back for the third time in Northern Virginia, and this is a league that is going through it right now, its own financial instability and trying to right the course and find a way forward for its future in the wake of pulling all of this money that the Saudi Public Investment Fund has said it won't fund LIV through the end of the year. And it's left a lot of these golfers, a lot of these teams that they prop up, and they love the team concept. There's a lot of questions. There's not a lot of answers, and there's more questions than answers as it comes to the future of LIV.
Yeah, and it seems like, based on a lot of your reporting, is that the golfers who can, pursue other opportunities are kind of starting to test the waters for what that might look like. There are guys who are starting to work their way back into the PGA Tour, guys who are, like Bryson DeChambeau, who's one of the biggest personalities in the sport, who says, maybe YouTube is my future. But I'm curious what the atmosphere has been like for you, who are a little bit more deeply involved in the golf scene than I am, of what the atmosphere is kind of like at the events that are leading up to LIV Golf Virginia.
You said it before we jumped on, and that was kind of like my sense is moving the deck chairs on the Titanic as the band plays. I hate to use such a metaphor, but it's so I was at last year's tournament. I'll be at this year's tournament. Last year was at Robert Trent Jones Golf Club, which to me signaled a little more of a prestige for the tour. They came the first time it came to DC. It was at the same course it's at this week at Trump National in Sterling, and logical choice because it's upstart. It ruffled a lot of feathers. Major courses that hosted PGA events weren't going to give it access, so it's got to kind of find these prestigious courses that maybe aren't used by the PGA Tour. And of course, the president, who had faced a backlash from the PGA pulling back from some of his courses, was more than happy to host LIV. And at that time, he was running for his second term, and so it was a little bit part golf, part campaign rally, part America festivity, whole 9 yards, right? And so last year, seeing them when I, get the release and like they're going to RTJ, like that's interesting to me because RTJ is a multiple-time President's Cup host back in the 90s. The Solheim Cup was there in 2024, and it's a beautiful club. It's a beautiful course, and it was right before the U.S. Open last year at Oakmont. And so it's like, okay, for the whole LIV guys don't have the same level of competition and whatnot. They're playing RTJ, and then they're going to go to Pittsburgh and play Oakmont. That was kind of like a little more of a legitimate type of setting. It rained most of the entire weekend, so the course softened up a lot. Joaquin Neiman was the eventual winner last year. And so we go from that to, it's just been one change after they moved from 54 holes to 72. And so it's funny comparing the people who were around last year, just kind of in the room in the press conferences, where there's a little, small quasi diehard golf community of folks that have covered these events in our area the past couple of years, and it was a little smaller, but some of the same dedicated folks. This week we've got Mark Schlabach from ESPN's flown in, a whole bunch of people from Golf Digest and Golf Network, Golf Channel and Golf.com have flown. So like the big national people have come in because LIV's been out of town, and in Mexico was the previous event, which there's a little bit of this dead man walking type of atmosphere to it, Liam. And I will say, like, just in terms of like golf tournament, covering a LIV event to covering, a non-LIV event, a touch more extravagant in the way that they poured money into like the food and beverage. I hate talking about this as a media person because it's just like, oh, media people complaining about whatever. But like the buffet offerings for breakfast and lunch were very fancy and more than just like a standard, here's a sandwich and a bag of chips. Happy to have a sandwich and a bag of chips, but then here's like they're making omelets. And these, like, so they did pour at RTJ last year, and I assume the rest of their events, a lot of this money to the tune over the course of the tour of $5 billion of an investment that will grow to reportedly $6 billion by the end of this year. And the PIF hasn't seen the return it wanted on it for the increase in sponsors. They've increased some sponsorships, but not to the same level. They are on an actual network now with Fox before it started as with the CW, but it's not drawing the eyeballs, right? So it does feel like this tenuous thing. And Scott O'Neill, who's the CEO and comes in and he's doing his best PR job to paint a happy face on this type of thing. But if there is no either consortium or financial backers that want to step forward to buy these teams, he envisions them buying these four aces and the cliques and the crushers, buying them like you buy the Washington Spirit or the Nationals or whatever, then there's no way forward to fund this. If there's no money next year, this kind of zombie thing that wanders from course to course, and there's no real stakes for it, and who knows what the end game is going to be next year if they don't have any funding after this 2026 season. But it did feel, to your point, a little bit like this kind of like, he's very cheery, but like everybody kind of sees the writing on the wall. It's not dead yet. It is, as I put in the article, it is on life support. Like there's no other way to put it. Like there's no money after this year. So what are you going to do?
And something that's kind of curious to me is these almost half measures they seem to have made in, they spent all that money when they're first building out that roster, and they're doing the 54 holes instead of the more traditional angle. And, the events themselves have this kind of festival vibe. Mm-hmm. And then they start to kind of walk those things back with the way they are, we're moving back to the 72 holes, and we're hitting some of the, less outside of the box courses. Yeah. And so I'm curious, like, what your view is on how they've kind of worked in these half measures as they're working to kind of prolong their lifespan.
Yeah, so they trip over themselves in Louisiana. So they were supposed to play in New Orleans at the end of next month. Then LIV from their side starts the condition of the course isn't good enough. There's too many sports, citing the World Cup going on at the end of June, which is, roughly when it'll start kicking up. The weather, we're concerned about the weather and it's going to be hot. So we're going to move it to the fall. And if you've been in the deep South in the fall, it's worse than it is in June with the humidity. And also all of the major hurricanes that seem to strike the United States come right in the heart of hurricane season. When is that? It's at the end of August and through September. And then the Louisiana organizers come out and say in a backhanded way in their PR release about the cancellation of the event, we'd like to thank the PGA Tour, which just held the Zurich tournament down here, which is the team event, and thank them for their support. And then, say we're sorry that LIV couldn't figure this out, basically. So I can understand if it's just straight, like you're saying, hey, we pulled the money and you need to find more funding, but they're tripping over themselves, Liam, in finding ways to just like stabilize this thing. The move to 72 was a bit in part, you're trying for these golfers to try to get OWGR points, official World Golf Ranking points that would then allow them to be ranked in there. And if you're ranked in the OWGR, then you can get access into certain tournaments elsewhere around the world. I some of the things like I like shotgun starts. I don't think you have to do it every round. I think on, if you're at a PGA Tour, in person, shotgun start is great because you've got somebody going, you've got a group. If we assume it's 3 players like the normal start of a PGA event, they're not just going off on 1 and 9. And so everybody's camped on holes 1 and 9, waiting for their favorite, either going to sit through there the whole day or they're going to wait for their favorite trio to come through, maybe follow them around the course. You can be on any hole of the course, spread the fans out. I think it's better access for fans with a shotgun start. I'm not saying, do it at the Masters or do it at the majors, but some of these lower level PGA events, maybe not the signature events like the Truist this week in Charlotte, but some of these other PGA events, I think a shotgun start it would be interesting, especially for not only for fans on the course, but it provides a tighter television window. So I think there is something there, but I don't think a lot of people in terms of the PGA Tour are on board with that. I don't want to say I feel for Jon Rahm, because he was kind of, pretty nakedly honest about, hey, I'm doing this for the money, and didn't parrot the grow the game line that Bryson and some of the other golfers that jumped when they did jump is. But you can kind of tell that he's lost his luster and lost his passion for the game of golf, which is sad to see, because he's beloved by a lot of people, both obviously Spaniard and on the European side when he competes in those Ryder Cups, but also, lives in Arizona, went to ASU, and he's got a big following here in the States, and it's U.S. Open champion, Masters champion. And so it's kind of sad to see. He feels like the way he sounded this week at the press conference, he was the only official, him and his team members, players made it available to us officially. And he just kind of sounds like he's, just stuck a little bit. Right. So they have adapted here, Liam, but it feels like too late, because you heard some of the golfers, including Rahm, say it, and Sergio Garcia as well, that they were under the assumption they were at least funded through 2030. That's still a deadline, but it's a 4-year away deadline. So, hey, let's just carry on as we've been doing. But I think if some of these golfers were clued in even last year from the PIF that, hey, we're going to start to pull back on this, maybe not completely, maybe partially. Rahm said this week himself that he was one of the players that pushed for the expansion to 72. Like, hey, let's get this back to the format that everybody's used to. There's always been this talk that the LIV guys aren't prepared for the majors. That's kind of silly, because especially at the Masters, they've been finishing, multiple golfers have finished in the top 10, 15 at some of these majors. So I don't think that's entirely true, but obviously 72 is what everybody plays. So I just think they've done the tinkering here a little too late. I don't know what the way forward is. I don't see somebody, there's not going to be like an angel investor that comes in and just like buys the whole thing, right? I do think if they can gather multiple parts of people, kind of, not to compare it to the Commanders, but it's the first one that pops in my head, where, Josh Harris gets a whole consortium of people, Magic Johnson included among them, Mark Hine included among them, dozens others, to be a part of this ownership group and contribute money in some way, though Josh Harris is the, primary owner, right? If you can find some sort of consortium group of people who love golf and perhaps want to invest in this league to have it continue, then I would say that's the way forward. But so far, there's not been anybody that's willing to put their money to that and make it happen.
Yeah, and we don't know, there is no end date on Liv's tombstone quite yet. But when we look back at this whole weird experiment from the lens of the players and the public investment fund and the golf world at large, like, what do you think is going to be Liv's legacy when we're looking, 10, 15 years down the road?
I don't think some of the folks that love the PGA Tour, and there's been a lot of people standing on their soapbox trumpeting how they were right this week, the last 2 weeks, about LIV. I never thought it was going to be that sustainable in the long term personally, but as much as people who are very pro PGA Tour and anti LIV, much to their chagrin, I believe that it did push the PGA Tour to modernize itself. The PGA Tour went out and sought different avenues of funding. Set aside the whole, I think the grow the game thing is a little bit of BS. Like, they've shown some growth in Australia. That's great. South Africa, Korea, those are big hotbeds for golf, especially in Asia, where women's golf is women's golf women's golf is a more popular sport in Asia and the Pacific than it is here in the United States, even though you've got Nelly Korda, who's the number one player in the world and has crushed it for 2 of the last 3 years. But they have nudged and pushed, kind of kicking and screaming, the PGA Tour to modernize themselves. And that kind of goes back to Jay Monahan when he was the head of the PGA Tour and just kind of basically, took a very defiant stance, which was probably necessary on his part at the time. But at the end, he is not the person to lead the PGA Tour into the future. And so here comes Brian Rolap. And Rolap, you mentioned earlier about players leaving. Rolap at the beginning of this year offers this pathway for, hey, select players, if you've won a major, if you've done this, here's a pathway back. Obviously, Koepka took it because he was eligible, and none of the other golfers took that at the time. In January, with this severe financial penalty, you don't get any FedEx Cup points initially, you don't have a stake. And so what LIV has done, as much as people who are PGA Tour stands might not appreciate, is it has modernized the PGA Tour. The players have a greater stake in what's happening now on the PGA Tour. There are talks to modernize the schedule where you're not having these tournaments every week that you have to show up at. The signature events, elevating the signature events, elevating the purses on the tour, which was probably, if we just want to boil it down to money, LIV raised the floor in terms of pay on the PGA Tour, modernized it to where these guys do not have to play, if they don't want to, this arduous week in, week out schedule, because golf is a year-round sport, even though it shuts down kind of after the FedEx Cup in August. PGA Tour is right-sizing some of these events in a hope for DMV fans, for DC golf fans. Rolap has spoken about, we need to get tournaments into major cities, whether that's more in Boston, more in New York City, more in a place like DC that doesn't have a main stomp anymore, or we have to think about some of these events that have been in a place for a lot of years, and that's great, but maybe, like Formula One has done, maybe they start rotating. So on the even years, DC has an event and it's held at Congressional or wherever, and then on the odd years, the event's held in Detroit, or the event's held in, Indianapolis, wherever it may be. So LIV's legacy will be that it pushed the PGA Tour to modernize itself, which ended up being better for the entire golf world and negated some of the main negative effects that PGA Tour proponents were worried about when LIV made its debut.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of what the takeaway is from the more casual viewer, is maybe they weren't tuning in to LIV golf on a week-to-week basis. Maybe they weren't following the teams as closely. But when they step back, they're going to see and feel the difference in the way that the PGA Tour is operating. And I think the impact on the players can't be understated as well, is that a lot of those guys made some really big paychecks as a result of that really huge initial investment. And at the time when LIV first started that rollout, there was a concern about the social cost, about what this was going to do to players' legacies or reputations. And I feel like, looking back 4 years on, we have not seen that really pan out. Now, some of that is obviously because they were still able to, a lot of them, the best players were able to compete in majors without any major issues. But even when you're, on Twitter talking to people at the bar or at the club, it's not as drastic as a lot of people were initially concerned when you're talking about how those golfers are perceived 4 years later.
Yeah, they tried the big swell was, hey, we're going to poach all this talent, right? And that rocks the boat very substantially. It wasn't a gradual, okay, here's Bryson, who was already kind of a guy who looked like, as you talked about, one to strike out on his own just because of how different he thinks and how big his social media presence is. Americans have short memories about things. And so now here we are down the road. And what is the common refrain that we get, Liam, is like, we just want to see all the best golfers compete when they, at these premier events, right, at the majors. And they made the big splash. They rocked the boat. It won't be remembered in a good light by most people just because of the ties. And it's interesting to see not only the Saudis pull back from this, but from their other investments as well, soccer team abroad and some other sport-related investments to refocus their strategy, as they're calling it. But in the whole, I'm not going to say it was good for golf, but it forced, because it wasn't. It's been a civil war that's kind of pick a side. You had to be on a side. I don't know if there's I don't think there's going to be like this healing process, but just kind of a, making the relations regular again as some of these guys come back and start playing in events together again. I think will be the biggest thing, is this kind of heals this civil war.
Absolutely. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't think I could sum that up any better. As a more, I'm viewing these things from much more of a distance than you are, because you do such a great job in that coverage, and I think you're absolutely on the money.
Yeah, we'll see what it looks like going forward as LIV takes place this week at Trump National in Chantilly. We'll see how it plays out. A reminder to find District of Sports wherever you get your podcasts. Just search District of Sports in your favorite podcast app. Also, find Liam on social media at by Liam Griffin, myself at Gerbo3 on social media. It's good to chat once again, Liam. We'll do this again soon. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for having me. It's always a blast.
Absolutely. For Liam, I'm George. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.